All right. I'm Meredith Wills. If you saw the talk earlier, Ken Kaufman is actually my secret identity. And so this is me, I don't know, I think superhero, real life, or whatever. For those of you who have been paying attention, I have been tearing apart baseballs, both last year and this year. And this is going to be the first of, I guess, 5 talks right now that will be talking about the baseball. And I have a 3,000-word article that I need to cram in 15 minutes. So let's put it this way: if we don't get everything, we'll be all right. You can read the article. And I brought show and tell. So anybody who wants to look at baseballs afterwards or whatever, it's all good. So anyway, let's see if I can make this work. I could have shown you a lot of stats, but I feel like this headline kind of sums it up. MLB warns home run hitters leave almost out of balls. That's from The Onion, but it could happen. You never know. So in 2017, you guys may remember that in the Mountain Leagues where we had a home run surge in 2017. Everybody freaked out. It was great. A bunch of us looked at it. MLB had a home run committee that went and did some incredible work. If you have not read the 80-page home run report, do it. Basically what they found out was it's the ball. So what they found was that the drag was lower. They could not find out, however, or they weren't able to find out at the time, what the source of the change in drag was. I was contemporaneously doing my own work looking specifically at the construction of the ball, and I did find a difference, which was that the laces were thicker. And then in a follow-up study, I was actually able to make a connection between the fact that the thicker laces seemed to be related to a ball that was rounder, had more spherical symmetry, and a rounder ball ends up with less drag, travels further. We'll get back to that a little more later slide. But so this is, as I would call it, home run surge 1. Welcome to 2019. Because, of course, the ball should change as often as possible. We are now in home run surge 2. Maybe we'll have home run surge 3 eventually, who knows. So very early on in the season, as in like opening day, particularly pitchers, were noticing that the ball was different. And by a week into the season, that's not what I meant to do. By a week into the season, Rob Arthur, there's almost a laser pointer, did this great study looking at baseballs literally in the first week and was finding out that the drag was already lower. Like, it only took a week. And he was able to quantify that the drag was lower than it had been in 2018. Also, MLB was even on the record by, April 11th, I guess, to Joel Sherman saying, yeah, their own internal testing had showed there was lower drag. So, more home runs to be expected, considering everyone's finding lower drag. So, seeing as I was already good at tearing apart baseballs, I figured, heck, let's tear apart more baseballs. And I wanted to look at the kinds of things that would affect drag. Now, size, leather smoothness, there is an asterisk for a reason. Bart, I am expecting you to pick up on this 2 talks from now. You can keep them on the hook. The height of the seams, the roundness of the ball, spherical symmetry, and then there has been some discussion of the centeredness of the pill. I'm not going to go into that. That was Commissioner Manfred's thing. Let's just say it's really hard to make an off-center pill to begin with. So, besides, it's hard to measure. So I thought, okay, I'm going to look at these 4, and I'm going to see, have there been any changes? And if there are changes, are those the kind of changes that would affect how the ball is traveling? So, first one, size. Easy to measure size. You'd think if the ball is smaller, it's going to travel further, right? Turns out the ball is not smaller. The ball is actually slightly larger on average. And just to give you a feel for the groups that I'm looking at, pre-home run surge is up through 2014 in these samples. Home run surge 1 is 2016 through 2018, basically. Home run surge 2 is 2019. And we ended up with, I think it's, was it 32, 44, and 39? So I tore apart a lot of baseballs. For this stuff, at least, it's statistically significant. One of the things to point out with the circumference is those error bars actually are very slightly smaller. Keep that in mind. There will be a quiz. Leather smoothness. So size hadn't changed. Leather smoothness, look, leather is smoother. Also, error bars are smaller. The way that I did this was, because I had taken apart the baseballs, I actually looked at the coefficient of static friction. We can do this demo outside later, but suffice it to say that you end up with being able to slide the leather cover down a board in this case, and the angle tells you what the coefficient of static friction is. As long as you use the same board, you basically get relative smoothness, as it were. And the key here is that that is the smoothest baseball going back at least 20 years. We've never seen leather this smooth. This just has never happened before. So change number one, leather is smoother on the ball. Any more changes? Of course there are. Change number two, and again, I did this by measuring seam height, having taken the baseballs apart. So there may be other discussions about seam height, and it's being measured differently. So just be prepared for, because different methods are being used, there may be slightly different descriptions. But once again, look, different. Oh, and slightly smaller error bars compared to some of them. And not only are they different, they're half as high. Half as high. The ball is smooth, it's round, it's insane. One kind of side effect that we're getting from this basically is that it looks like, I mean, it's more anecdotal than anything, but we're hearing a lot more about pitchers doctoring the ball. That's just a grip with it. The leather is so smooth and the seams are so low that it's really, really hard to grip it, and it's hard to get break. So I don't blame them, and I don't blame that MLB is looking the other way. So 2 changes. Think there might be a third? I think there might be a third. So spherical symmetry, and this was actually what happened last time, was that the, how am I doing for time? Oh, I'm good. The spherical symmetry before, what I found, and it's actually these 2 numbers, and in fact these 2 graphs, showed that the 2018 ball in this case, which is the same population, at least manufacturing-wise, as 2017, turned out to be rounder. This ball, for 2019, is even rounder than that. And the graph on the left, excuse me, the graph on the right, my bad, shows the deviation from spherical symmetry, or from the average diameter, I should say. And so this is 0. This is the percentage difference from average diameter. You will notice that this ball is pretty much round. And this is not taking the seams into account. This is literally like looking at places away from the seams. Another thing to keep in mind is that the 2019 ball and then this 2000 through 2014 are completely different. Those uncertainties don't overlap at all. These are 2 totally different baseballs. I'm also pointing out here the idea, this gets back to my measuring seam height differently than people who are measuring intact baseballs. So because of the way I measured seam height, and again, we can talk about this after, seam height and spherical symmetry may end up basically being the same thing, or confounded enough where they'll show up as a single variable if you're measuring the ball intact. Because of the way I did it, they end up as 2 variables. The results are consistent, let's just put it this way. So 3 changes, because of course, you change 3 major things about the ball, right? Think there's more? Yes. Of course. Lace thickness, in theory, should not be affecting the aerodynamics. However, because the previous study showed, look, the laces were thicker, I thought, of course you go and you measure lace thickness. That's what I did before. The lace thickness is actually from the previous study as well. You can even sort of see, look, these laces are thinner, these are thicker. That's also why the numbers are the way they are. So more reps per centimeter is thinner laces, fewer reps, thicker laces. So thinner laces, thicker laces. This is pre-home run surge 1. This is home run surge 1. This is home run surge 2. So somehow we have thinner laces with home run surge 2. Which, if you consider the previous slide, kind of doesn't make sense, because the whole reason this happened was because the laces were thicker. So how in the heck did we get a rounder ball despite the fact that the laces are once again thinner? Now it turns out that the reason that I found for the ball being more spherically symmetric to begin with last year for Home Run Surge 1 was because the balls were being air dried, and air dried cotton, when it's stretched, stays stretched. So thicker cotton laces just aren't going to stretch as much being air dried, therefore you get the ball staying rounder. The thinner laces, ball is going to deform slightly more, it's not going to be as round. Somehow they made a baseball with thinner laces that were not being stretched. That's the key. Somehow it just wasn't happening. So how did all this happen? If you guys remember, MLB bought Rawlings. I guess they announced it, beginning of June last year, end of May, just after the Home Run Committee report came out. And the idea was that they were going to go in and they were going to improve quality control, and they were going to have greater oversight, they were going to be more involved in the process. As far as I can tell, that's basically what they did. Rawlings has always focused on certain things like making the leather smoother, making the seams lower, making the ball rounder. This is just part of their MO. So did they improve the quality? Well, all those uncertainties, or at least when I started to talk about them, the uncertainties were basically smaller for this year's baseball. So yeah, it looks like quality control has gone up. Leather, smoother. Rawlings likes making the leather smoother. So it looks like that quality control has gone up too. As far as oversight, one of the issues with Home Run Surge 1, with that ball, was that those thicker laces were associated with this massive spike in pitcher blisters. So what did they do? Yay, they made the laces thinner again, so if pitchers are getting blisters, it's not because of the laces. And so that says a lot to oversight on the part of MLB that, look, they're actually doing something where they're trying to make it better for the pitchers, at least as far as injuries go. Process improvement, I think, may be why this ball, this is a 2019 Home Run Surge 2, is doing what it's doing. Whatever the motivation for it, before the balls were being air dried. There are a couple theories. It may just be that I reported the balls are being air dried. This is changing the possible spherical symmetry. We've had some discussions recently that maybe it was because they're now having to produce twice as many baseballs. Because if you remember, the AAA ball is now exactly the same as this. So if you need to produce twice as many baseballs, suddenly air drying a bunch of baseballs just might take too much time. So what I think may be happening is Rawlings, or I suppose MLB Rawlings now, has always done process improvements. The drying process is one of the finishing processes, one of those things that you consistently see them trying to improve. What I think they literally did was they stopped air drying the baseballs and did the equivalent of putting them under a blow dryer. It's going to make them dry faster. And by the way, that wet cotton, if you let it air dry, it stays stretched. Who here does their own laundry? Okay, this is good. This is good. Anybody who isn't doing laundry probably shouldn't be here. But, sorry. Anyway, t-shirt, it's all wrinkled, put in the wash, throw it in the dryer, comes back looking like before you wore it. Basically because the wet cotton shrinks back. By virtue of taking the ball, which by the way the leather has to be wet in order for it to conform from going flat to being round. If you air dry, if you put this under a blow dryer, those laces aren't going to stretch anymore. They're going to stay intact. And so suddenly you can get thinner laces that will stay intact and give you a rounder ball. However, I think what might also have happened is that by keeping those laces intact, they held the seams down. So the ball is rounder with lower seams because they took a blow dryer to the ball. That's it. It's funny how little changes can have massive impacts. Lastly, and Joe Koznansky, who actually I forgot to put in the thank yous, but he gets a shout out, did a really interesting article a few weeks ago where he looked at the history of essentially what he called juice balls. And all that really means is balls that were traveling further and producing home runs. And it turns out there is a long history, went back to 1910. And over, same thing. Ball starts flying out. MLB says, we have no idea why. Some people think it's great. Some people think it's awful. They end up bringing in somebody with a really big degree who looks at the baseball and says, we have no idea what happened. Very standard. So hence the quote, history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. Over and over and over, this has happened in baseball. What's great here, and this is me, and this is the next 4 talks after me, we're now bringing in science in a way that's genuinely making a difference. So stuff like what the Home Run Committee did, and some of the things we're going to see later, aerodynamic testing, doing modeling, is actually telling us about the ball. We know that the drag is lower. We know it's not necessarily the coefficient of restitution or exit velocity. We know it's drag because we've been able to test that it's drag. We, or I should say I, has anyone else been tearing apart baseballs? Have, in terms of measuring and quantifying physical changes, you know, I just found 4 demonstrable changes to baseball just by going through and doing these measurements. So what you have to realize, and this is actually really, really cool, and when I realized this, like, oh my God, we are part of history. This is the first time in the history of baseball that we have been able to tie actual physical changes to a change in home runs. This is it. We've finally done it. We finally figured out how, which honestly I think is really damn cool. So there we go. We're making history. And thank you, The Athletic, for letting me do this insanely long piece. Rob Arthur, who's great contact. Bart Smith, who's going to be speaking later. Ryan Spader, whose statistics I did not use, and hopefully he'll forgive me. Lots of colleagues, friends, family, and thank you to Dan and Chuck for letting me give this talk. And if we have time for questions, great, and if not, I have show and tell, and you can find me afterwards.
Questions will be fielded in the